Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to wait a couple minutes here just to give everyone a chance to get online and join the webinar. We're super excited. As we're waiting for the room to fill up, let's get the chat started. So why don't you drop in the chat, please, post where you're joining us from today and an event or trip you're looking forward to this summer. So whether that's traveling or it is a concert that you're planning to see or a festival or something, just drop that in the chat just to get things moving. All right. Yeah, just drop in the chat where you're joining us from today and anything you're looking forward to this summer. And we'll give this just another minute or two for people to drop in. All right. We have someone traveling to Maryland for youth lacrosse. Sounds great. Oh, yeah, Montreal and Quebec City. This is the time to do it. We had one of our team members went over the holiday break, and even though we're in Wisconsin, she had to get extra new coats because it was so cold. She thought she could deal with Montreal with Wisconsin coats, but it was even colder there. Miami Beach, fantastic. Yeah, I see some beaches coming in. Marquette, Michigan, great. We love that Michigan shoreline, upstate New York. I'm headed to Cape May in New Jersey next week to stay with some family. We've got a house down there to enjoy the beach. Being here kind of landlocked except for the lakes, it's always nice to get to the ocean. All right, yeah, Chicago, coming here from Chicago. I'm going to be going to Lake Geneva, beautiful spot just north of Chicago and south of Milwaukee. Very cool. All right, well, it looks like folks have settled in. I want to just first welcome you to our Education Media Roundtable today. I'm Jeremy Cesarek. I'm a partner on the Fin Education team. Fin's education team is the most experienced marketing and communications practice dedicated to all forms of teaching and learning. We're so glad you could join us today and hear from this fantastic panel of education media professionals. We have 60 minutes set aside for today's discussion, and then we also have some time at the end for Q&A. So we had some questions come in ahead of the webinar, so thanks for sending those. But if you have any during today's call, just drop them in the Q&A function and we will, in the Zoom, and we will make sure to get to as many of those as we can. The session is being recorded, so we'll send a link to you tomorrow, which you can share with your team. And I will be mostly behind the scenes today, keeping an eye on that Q&A as you're submitting. And I'm eager to hand this over to our fantastic moderator, Alexander Russo, who is the founder of The Grade. Alexander, thanks again for serving as our moderator today. Why don't you introduce yourself and our panelists?
Excellent. Thanks, Jeremy, and everyone else at Fin. Thanks to my fellow panelists. I'm eager to learn from you, and thanks to everyone who showed up to listen. In case anyone doesn't know, The Grade is a newsletter and a video podcast focused on how schools are covered in the media. This is something I started about 10 years ago after having covered having covered schools for about 15 years. I thought that there was often a disconnect or a misunderstanding going on between the educators I knew from my previous life and the journalists I'd come to know. And I thought I could help translate these two worlds, one to the other. And that's what I've been doing. And that's what we'll be doing a little bit here today, which is why I'm so delighted to be here today. The one thing I want to say to make clear is that journalists have just as much to learn from educators, especially as education innovators, have to learn from journalists. Journalism is also in a very competitive, highly fragmented, and sometimes polarized environment. And so journalists are, I hope, this has been one of the big things that I've tried to emphasize with The Grade, are in a position of having to learn, adapt, and compete that maybe they didn't have to do 5, 10, or 15 years ago. So I'm really happy to be here. I think I'm going to learn a lot. I hope we all learn as well. Let me jump in and introduce everyone. You'll see their bios there. Some of the folks here have been on my podcast, which is called The Education Show. Everyone who hasn't been on is hereby invited to be a guest. It's always fun to talk to journalists one-on-one. I'm just going to go left to right. Chad Alderman is a non-traditional journalist, is the word I would use to describe him, though he appears in very traditional places, including most notably the 74. Kara Arundel from K-12 Dive has been a traditional trade journalist for a long time and brings an enormous amount of experience covering the ins and outs of this massive beat. Emma Kate Fittis is probably the person who's most well known to Finn partners and Finn partners clients because of her work with the Ed Week's Market Brief. And MJ Slavey, another Indiana person, is the bureau chief for Chalkbeat Indiana. So I want to say welcome to all of you and thanks so much for doing this with me. Again, I'm going to learn as much from you as you learn from me. Let's jump in if we can. Great. Let's jump in if we can and start talking about where things are sort of today in the present. And I'm just going to ask you all to go around the horn, so to speak. Kara, maybe I'll start with you and ask you, what's the pressing issue of the moment in June, late June 2026? And I'll get to everyone after Kara.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alexander, for all you do. And nice to be here today with everyone. The biggest challenge I have right now is there's so many stories I want to get to, but no time. I feel like there's such a a thirst for information right now, especially with the changes at the federal, Department of Education and other agencies. There's just so much I want to get to. I also want to write longer, in-depth stories with many voices. And I'm still able to do that, but also try to cover it on a daily basis. So I think I've always had those struggles, but it feels more intense right now.
And Kara, before we move on, how many stories a week or month are you trying to write, just so we get a sense of your pace?
Yeah, I basically, and my coworkers at K-12 Dive, we write either a story a day or 4 stories a week, depending on vacations and conferences. But yeah, we're trying to do it at a fast clip.
Yeah, you definitely are. Emma Kate, what's the top issue on your mind right now?
Well, I was nodding along with Kara, so I think, that's sort of a universal problem. But I guess to add on to it, another big challenge that I'm facing is sort of like news burnout for our readers, for our sources, for myself. I think that, I've noticed a difference on my beat that compared to a couple of years ago, there's, I think, just a lot more negativity or sort of just like uninterest in like continuing to try to like hash out the same problems that we've been talking about for a couple of
Mhm.
years now. So I think that's something that we're thinking about a lot is how to, in my role, I stay pretty solutions oriented and try to stay focused on, what works and how to move forward.
So interesting. The issue of burnout is obviously an important one, both for journalists and for people reading journalism. I really appreciated this morning. The Washington Post has a story out in which the journalist takes on the role of playing an online student who's racking up credits. This is a story that's not new, but the Post had the journalist, who I think his name is Todd Wallach, sign up and pass courses at an incredible speed just to illustrate a problem in the system and also to bring some novelty to it. So, Emma Kate, unsolicited suggestion, sign up for some courses and tell us how easy it is to pass them. MJ, what's top of mind for you?
Yes. Well, definitely echoing Kara and Emma Kate. I always say there's never a dull moment on the Ed beat. But the big thing we're thinking about here in Indiana are the upcoming elections, both for school board, but also for referendums or those tax increases, because school finance, there's been a lot of changes in Indiana with funding, with property taxes And that's all really going to play out in really significant ways going forward. Things like school closures, consolidations,
Yeah.
what services will be available to what students. So I think we're really paying attention to that school funding and seeing if communities are going to vote for these tax measures, these referendums, especially at this time when everything just feels so unaffordable already.
And just out of curiosity, I should know this, but I don't.
Yeah.
Is Indiana signed up for the federal choice program? And do you have the ed tech backlash going on there as well?
Um, yes, and I would say somewhat. I mean, Indiana has a bell-to-bell cell phone ban that will be going into effect for this school year. So lawmakers, the previous session had sort of limited cell phone personal device use and then really went bell to bell this last year. So I think you're seeing some of that as well.
Excellent. Chad, talk to us about what's at the top of your mind. You're in a slightly different position because you're functioning as a columnist and a substacker, but we still want to know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say the same answer as Karen and McKay and maybe switch it in a slightly different way, which is that I find that I'm disappointed when I get stuck being reactive and like responding to stuff rather than proactive about things that I want to write about and sort of I want to drive an agenda or talk about how to get kids back on track and reading and math and improvements in chronic absenteeism and finding stories out there that places that are doing a good job. And then find myself sometimes responding to things that are happening in the news that maybe aren't where I'd like to be spending my time. So, as an example, I wrote a Substack piece this morning responding to a New York Times column just because I felt compelled that I didn't feel like it was giving a fair story, a representation of the history and the data of No Child Left Behind and school accountability policy.
Uh,
I when I read it, I didn't want to write about it, and then some people nudged me to write, and so I did, and I spent a couple hours yesterday cranking out a piece.
and now you feel bad about yourself, but we appreciate it
Yeah,
because
exactly. Yeah.
we all had so many feelings about this is the Ross Wiener piece, I assume you're
It
talking about.
it is, yes. Yeah.
Before I let you go, Chad, just because you're an example of this new kind of non-traditional journalist, can you help us understand how what you do works compared to what editor or reporter in a traditional outlet or on a trade team might do? Are you a freelancer? Are you on contract? Are you making gobs of money, I hope, on Substack? Tell us how it works.
A couple things. So one, I've been contributing to the 74 million. I did it when I worked at a nonprofit. And then when I left there, I reached out to them and they agreed to pay me some small money for writing on a regular basis. So that's part of my revenue. I also do contracting and um, either independent advising, or I do data work and some other analysis for contract for clients directly. My Substack is still free. I keep having dreams about whether I will eventually turn on a paywall and pursue that more. I haven't pulled the trigger yet, but been thinking about that.
Um, the importance of having Chad here can't be understated. Not only is he a helpful voice, but he's also a representative of something that I think we've seen a lot more of in the last 5 years, especially, which is this non-traditional information provider. Still giving factual information, still adding new information to the conversation, but doing it from outside of a newsroom. In the old days, Chad would have been either a professor or at a think tank doing his own thing, or he would have been a blogger and someone would have hired him into their newsroom. This is what happened to Ezra Klein or Trish Crane way back in the day. These days, people like Chad can stay out on their own, do their own thing, and increasingly, Chad, you get pitches now, right?
I do get pitches, probably not as much as the other folks on the call, but I get some. People think of me as a media member or journalist. I don't have that own self-orientation. I mostly think of myself as an analyst. And so I analyze data and write about it, and which means I have a different approach to how I cover a topic. I'm looking more for a research study that says something, or what does the research say about some other topic, rather than doing a bunch of interviews, talking to people and trying to tell that on the ground story. That's not quite what I do, and it's not what I'm good at.
Chad isn't the only person who is or is thinking about doing new things or innovating in the way they produce journalism. Journalists, as I said at the top, are having to innovate and adapt just as much as anyone else. I wondered if I could ask any of the others on the panel if they're doing anything new or in a new way, whether it's distribution or content or approach, or bringing different voices into their content distribution. Is anyone doing anything new or different that they'd like to share?
Yeah, I can share a bit. With the expansion of private school choice and the proponents, we've started dipping our toes into covering the private school marketplace. K-12 Dive still is really focused on public schools. But with the expansion of private school choice, both at the state level and now the federal program, we're looking at how that competition, the growing competition for students, is really impacting public schools.
That's interesting. Emma Kate, either you at Market Brief or Ed Week writ large doing anything new or different that might be interesting or might be helpful for folks to know about?
Good question. I think the Market Brief team in general is sort of a new and innovative thing that Ed Week is trying. So we're under the Education Week umbrella, but it's sort of similar to how you were describing your niche in journalism. The Market Brief niche was really realizing that companies and school districts weren't really understanding each other or often talking past each other. And that gap maybe was causing the products and services available not to meet school district needs. So all the journalism we do kind of has a lens of like, let's close that gap and make this better. So I think it allows us to do some things that maybe a traditional journalism wouldn't do. So we're definitely experimenting with different events and how we bring that community together. And we're experimenting with how we balance our content and our good journalism, and then how we try to translate that into some good PDs, maybe not formal PD, but some PD opportunities for companies or, folks on the sales team or whoever, what they need. So I think we're looking forward to trying a lot of things as our team matures. It's been 10 years now. And so I think, we'll see what happens next, but the whole thing is meant to be sort of innovative.
I'm not sure whether Market Brief produces any of them, but Ed Week is known for, and I think valued for, its trackers. Mm-hmm. These on various topics sort of pop up as needed, and then Education Week journalists keep track of things that otherwise might not might not be tracked in a conscientious, standardized way. And I think it's a good thing, because if Ed Week or someone else on this panel doesn't track important events, again, in the modern world in which we live, someone from outside journalism will start tracking it, and then we'll all be following them instead of following you, or we'll have our attention distracted.
Actually, I just launched one. If you want to talk about it at some point, we can. It's on state adoption cycles. So there we go.
Say it again. I'm sorry, I spoke over you.
Oh, I just launched one, so I'm happy to talk about that. But it's on state adoption cycles, and those curriculum adoption cycles.
Excellent. One of the things, I'm new to the ed tech part of the world, but certainly understanding budget cycles and even down to contracts and audits. That's incredibly interesting and important information to understand the ecosystem that so many people work in. MJ, you're under no obligation at all. Wave me off, but Chalkbeat Indiana or Chalkbeat in general are doing interesting things, which I'm sure they are. Please take a minute to tell us about something new or different.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to build on the tracker discussion, one of the things we've been doing the last couple of years is a education bill tracker during our legislative session. And that was actually born out of reader feedback through our State House texting project. So Alex Appleton, our State House reporter, she'll text people updates about what's going on at the State House, linked to stories, that kind of thing. And that was something that they asked for, was the tracker. But what I was going to mention when we first started this question is, so Chalkbeat has long been available to republish. That's been one of our long-standing features, right? For other news organizations can republish our stories. Think sort of like the Associated Press, but for free. And so we've long done that. But one of the things that I've really focused on since joining Chalkbeat is our partnerships with other news organizations in town. We're a 3-person team. As we mentioned, it's never a dull moment. And so how can we work with other reporters in town to make things happen that, our team wouldn't normally have capacity for, or their team wouldn't normally have capacity for? Things like expanding, I'm going to go back to the elections because I have elections on the brain, but expanding some of our voter guides there, and also in different formats. So being regular guests on various TV programs and that sort of thing. So really trying to work with other journalists in town to make stories happen that if we were all in our own newsrooms, we might not have the capacity for.
One last question on innovation and experimentation. Raise your hand if you or your newsroom are doing anything with social video. Chad.
I don't like it myself, and so I don't want to do it. And I know I'm leaning into the headwinds, but I don't enjoy it from my viewer perspective, and so I don't do it for in my own production cycle either.
We're gonna have to talk you out of that, Chad. Come over to the dark side. Okay, I was remiss earlier on, and I don't want to stress Jeremy out, and also I want to hear what people have to say, but I wanted to remind everyone that you can put questions in the chat, questions, comments, all sorts of things. We're gonna track them and get to some of them at the end. So please do, as we go through, ask questions. And I'm certainly eager to see them. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about a little bit is sort of the day-to-day of a journalist's life. And again, this is not because journalists are the most important people in the world, but because being in their stories, how you appear in their stories, or being ignored in their stories can be transformative for a school, a teacher, a company, an approach. And so it's an important thing to understand. And Kate, let me jump in and start with you and just ask, you must be drowning in pitches and press releases. How do you deal with the fire hose, and what makes you pull something out while you're by necessity, ignoring so many others?
Yeah, it is a lot. And I do my best to kind of skim through as many as I can. And so I always tell folks, like, please don't be like discouraged or offended if I don't like I've responded to very few of these. I would say when it comes to pitches, often what gets one pulled is lucky timing. And I know that sounds probably frustrating, but for the most part, like, I'm coming up with my story ideas and my focus areas and all of that based on like my ongoing reporting and conversations with folks. And so if I'm starting to notice a trend, for example, let me think of one. So like I was reporting a lot on PD, and someone happened to send me a pitch that was like, hey, we're thinking a lot about PD and how providers are changing and the market is changing for this. And I was like, oh, well, I'm currently writing this story, so this is a new name for me. I love talking to new people. And so I'll try to like hang on to some of them. So as I'm writing about that thing, I return to some of those old pitches and try to get some new voices. But otherwise, it's the pitches that are speaking to a broader trend or a new piece of data, or have a little more like context in it. I don't report on a product launch. It's good to keep me in the loop, but I'm not going to be reaching out to do a full story on a new product that's launching.
Does anyone else want to talk about pitches and press releases and how you deal with them? or ignore them. I know a couple of people who've basically just given up on their inbox and just ignore it like an overstuffed closet. Is there anyone else who has hopefully a more conscientious approach to sifting through pitches? Kara?
Yeah, so I'm gonna come out and say I love press releases. I remember the days working in the newsroom, waiting for press releases to come over the fax machine. So I'm still like that, eager little puppy. I do try to read every one of them. I would love to respond. I'm a curious person, so sometimes what I'll do is if something piques my interest, it is on a timely issue, I will call the person or write the person who sent it and just learn more. I'm not writing a story, I just want to learn more. And that's helping me make a connection too. And I love it when a release is straightforward, inverted pyramid style, like the journalists, and then also when pitches. I do like this. I like when the pitch says pitch in the subject line because I know what I'm getting into. I love when pitches have case studies. How is this happening in the real world on the ground, or the offer to connect me with a school system that is using the service or the innovative initiative. So
is there anything else that people do or should consider doing as a way of getting positive attention when they've got a product or an accomplishment or a shift happening? I'm thinking, for example, a non-email pitch, a pitch through another means. I know that some folks try to sort of bank shot their way into journalist attention by producing their own Substack, their own social media channel. Do people ever pick up stories indirectly that way?
I can
not
jump up.
Sorry, just real quick, not much so, but what I do also love is when I get approached with a story that, we're in June right now, and it's about something that's happening in September, October, giving me lots of time to plan it out, not the day before.
Excellent. MJ, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just gonna hop in and say, I agree with Kara on keeping it simple. Like it doesn't even always have to be a full press release for me. I like to tell people, like, please just like send me anything, keep me in the loop because you never know like what might lead to something else or what else we're already thinking about. And then the other one, just on our end, since we are a local publication, is like just making sure like you have that local tie-in and like why this is something we'd be interested in. The amount of press releases I get that are not from anything in Indiana is not small.
The percentages on a press release are daunting. I was watching a presentation from Muckrack about this, and it's not a high percentage kind of play, but it does get attention, as you're hearing here. And also, increasingly, it also plays a role in AI search results. And in the world in which we live, we all have to think about that as well. If you ask AI a question, some of the time it's going to respond based on a press release. Some of the time it's going to respond based on a news story. And obviously, journalists would like it if AI just fed readers news stories, but they do refer to press releases, and I thought that was an interesting thing to know in case you were about to give up your practice of press releases, because I know it can take a lot of time. Chad, do you have anything interesting to say about the people who are trying to get your attention through a formal press release or just by standing next to you in the coffee line?
Well, to Emma Kate's point, I basically ignore any product pitch if it's specifically about a product. like, here's a cool product. I want to see impact data. And so if there's something, a product that's been tested and it shows that it can boost reading outcomes for kids, or it can re-engage students and reduce chronic absenteeism by some percentage that seems both large but also plausible. I'm looking for those in sort of my BS detector. I get a lot of pitches on the teacher labor market because I write about it, and a lot of them are very junky surveys that are convenient samples of 198 teachers, and half of them are going to leave within the next 2 years. And that's just not reality. And so I either ignore those or sometimes I'll even angrily respond because I know they're wrong and they're just trying to get my attention or sell me on something, and I get annoyed. Um,
Are they
anything
still
with
coming? I'm sorry to interrupt. Are they still coming through primarily through old-fashioned email, or are they coming other ways?
Yeah, old-fashioned email is primarily what I'm talking about. But the same concept applies if someone grabbed me at a conference and they said, if they just told me about a product, I'd be mildly interested. But if they actually have some evidence behind it, and then I'm not as interested in the personal stories, but that's often useful as well if I can contact an actual user
Hmm,
about something.
excellent. Okay, we're going to move on to talk about the present and the future. The future is coming quickly, and the time is passing quickly. Again, if you've got questions, in about 10 minutes, we're going to start looking at questions and asking your questions. So please do line up at the mic, so to speak, so that your question can be asked. Okay. Um, Coverage themes and topics going forward. Um, I'm obsessed with the EdTech backlash, though I refuse to call it the techlash because that sounds so wrong to me. And I'm obsessed with what's going to happen on states deciding to participate in school choice, federally funded school choice or not. So that's my current and future obsession. Does anyone want to share or confess what they're most obsessed with right now besides vacation and a little break before the September starts again in 5 minutes? Kara, let me jump in and ask you. I apologize for not giving you a heads up, but I'm pretty sure you have some things in mind.
I'll add to that list. I really want to continue explaining the federal level changes and how that impacts states, districts, and schools. I think we're still learning all that. One thing that's exciting to me is understanding more about micro schools. I think that's a topic that needs a lot more exploration and stories from the ground, from families, from students. I also continue to think school security issues are a big topic, cyber attacks and other threats and solutions to those.
Oh, that's interesting. You're talking about mostly electronic intrusions. You're not talking about misbehavior in the classroom or in the hallways or school violence.
I Yes, that too. The physical security around schools, the use of AI cameras and detection, weapons detection, and how that is playing out both logistically, financially, and then emotionally for the school.
Right. Someone who has written a lot about electronic attacks on school, Mark Kierlieber, I saw recently. He is now out with Straight Arrow News, a new outlet to me. He was at the 74 for a long time and wrote a lot about those issues. Emma Kate, what is on your summer fall obsession list?
How much time do you have? I have a few things. So I've fallen down the rabbit hole into K-12 assessment and what could be next with what
Okay.
assessment looks like. And that's sort of seated within the world of trying to measure things that maybe weren't measurable before that could become measurable with AI on a larger scale. But all of this is very high in the, like all my conversations have been very like way forward looking, but it seems like an exciting space and one where school districts are demanding innovation in a way that it won't, that companies trying some new things, it won't outpace the need for it. So keeping an eye on that. I'm also really, I've been following for a while and need to continue following this idea of, I've just been calling them super providers. I don't really have a term for it, but with more market consolidation, we're seeing a trend of these companies sort of branching out from their normal lane and trying to offer curriculum, assessment, PD, like all kind of being a one-stop shop. So that's something I'm interested in. I've done some reporting, like just getting my toes wet on like, do districts actually want that? And then, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just can you give us an example of a super provider? It sounds
Okay, maybe I shouldn't have coined this term, but like we've seen some really high profile. So one that pops to mind is like NWEA and HMH merged a couple years ago and now are sort of this assessment and curriculum provider. And so that's one example, but there's also others within like, software companies expanding from what they originally did or and trying to also do like data collection and things like that.
Excellent. MJ, do you want to talk about where you're headed, what you're thinking about? I think it's fascinating that I haven't heard very much about Trump administration initiatives. I'm not complaining, I'm just observing. MJ.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is definitely something that we always have an eye on. Trump administration efforts, kind of the what happens when we have a Republican supermajority in the Indiana State House. So, kind of how all those policies then play out a year or two later. Things like private school vouchers. Indiana is universal. Well, we're about to be fully universal in a few days, July 1st, but how what that plays out in terms of access across the state. That's one of the stories that we've done, that sort of thing. And so when I think about what I'm obsessing over this summer, like I mentioned, school funding and how that's going to change everything. And that also goes back to our state house, and how they fund schools, school choice, like Kara mentioned. We recently did a story about a micro school expansion here in Indiana. So with micro school and vouchers, and Indianapolis has a new board that has some key powers over the district and the charter schools. So that's also been really fascinating. And then also, Indiana recently changed its high school diplomas and kind of the different pathways, with a real workforce emphasis. And so I think seeing how that all plays out and, what that really looks like in high schools and even younger too.
You may not know the answer to this question, and I certainly don't know the answer to it, but are there companies, providers that sell into micro schools or sell into homeschools? I'm assuming, given how big those and how fast growing those two sectors are, that there are commercial interests that are set up to help people start micro schools or to homeschool. Is that something you've encountered, or anyone else on the panel?
It's not something I've personally encountered yet, but I agree with you that it seems like something that probably does exist.
Yeah.
And my initial research shows there are some nonprofits that are working with micro school leaders to help them get their financing, a budget, the startup, basically. But those are nonprofits.
Interesting. Chad, you've written about budgets and enrollment and staffing, and I'm imagining that that's going to be a topic that you'll look at. I feel like we're going to see the word cliff in a lot of headlines this summer and fall. First of all, is that accurate? And what else are you thinking about?
Yeah, so a lot of people like me and Margaret Rosa and other people have been warning about a fiscal cliff for a couple years now, and I haven't hit it yet, as far as I can tell, in most places, but I am always on the lookout for that. So I do think there's some different budget impacts in play. We sort of reached peak teacher shortage narrative a few years ago, and so now it's a lot different. And
Right.
I think that the flip side will be more coming about layoffs and school closures. There have not been as many school closures as there historically were, or as there might have been projected based on enrollment. So enrollment declines, I think, are still likely to continue. I just saw a new data piece from Excel and Ed looking at birth numbers across the country, and the number of births per state has fallen in most places. And so fewer kids that are born means fewer kids that are going to schools. So those budget things I think are important for me. I'm a policy person, so I'm also looking ahead at the gubernatorial elections this fall, as well as gearing up for the 2028 primaries and what the presidential candidates start talking about on leadership. And then for me personally, I'm really interested in, I've been doing this project for the 74 on bright spots. We did this a big project on reading bright spots in schools that were outperforming what might be expected of them based on poverty. But just we're thinking through what that next iteration looks like of finding schools that are doing a good job and trying to tell those stories. We have plenty of doom and gloom, so find some good stories too.
No, it's good. There's also, I think in the latest round of test scores that we got, there were 100, I think just 100, but still 100 districts that had done much better in reading and math than their counterparts. And I really appreciate what you all are doing to, what others are doing to illuminate some of the places that make it clear that results aren't inevitable. There are two things I wanted to mention before we start talking about reader comments. This may be old news to all of you, but it's not old news to me, and so maybe some of you will appreciate it. First of all, there's an outfit called Board Docs that some of you are aware of, but some of you may not be aware of, that does a lot of collecting of school board meetings and information. I'm sure that education vendors and providers have been using it for a long time. Education journalists are using it more and more now, Board Docs. There's also a for-profit information provider, I don't know what to call him, called the Burbio Report, Burbio. A very nice guy named Dennis Burbio runs that. I think it's a family operation, but they do a search of board deliberations, which oftentimes have really important budget implications. And if I were either reporting on a school district or trying to sell into a school district or very many school districts, I'd certainly want to track what they were doing. This is not a paid endorsement, but someone should acquire Burbio. It seems amazing that no one has thus far, because they're a very popular outlet. Okay. We're now going to try to answer some questions. And Jeremy, I'm happy to go with some of the questions that had come in earlier in the morning, or I'm happy to have you read out some questions that have come in more recently. I am unable to talk and read at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can jump in, and I've got a couple highlighted here. Thanks for everyone who sent in ahead of time. And then we've gotten a bunch too as we've been live. But I want to focus on questions that I don't think we covered in all of those great answers so far. This one's a little bit more specific on how you work with sources. And the question is, do you feel like you are responding to and covering stories you receive from pitches, or are you coming up with a story idea angle and then looking for sources that can fit into that, or some combination of the two? And do you recommend still having PR folks pitch stories, or should they pitch spokespeople and explain a range of topics they can speak to? So it's a two-parter.
It's a good question. Does anyone want to take that one on?
I'm happy to jump in with some initial thoughts. I think it's some combination of the two. For me, I think probably most of my stories are, something that I have been following for a while, or sort of are naturally evolving stories, and then I look for sources. But every once in a while, a pitch tells me something I didn't know, and I go from there. I do appreciate the ones that highlight the expertise maybe, and not necessarily a specific story angle. I don't know that you need to go as far as to give me a super specific story angle, but it is good to just have some context of like, here's why this is important, essentially. Like, here's why I'm sending this to you. I've had a couple of pitches that I've appreciated recently that were like, I read your recent story about the mix of assessment and curriculum, and if a single provider should be providing that, and here's how we're thinking about it in the industry. And so that was really helpful, just to tie it back to like, I know you're writing about this. Here's why I think we'd be a good, place for you to put your attention. Hopefully that helps.
No, that's fascinating. I would have assumed, and maybe we're all different and we're all doing slightly different things, but I would have assumed that here's the expert availability wouldn't work. So I'm glad to know that it does work in some cases at least. Does anyone else have thoughts or want to take a stab at this question? Kara?
Yeah. And I same as Emma Kate, it's both pitches and also my initiation of stories or looking for new angles on an ongoing storyline. We, have analytics that tell us what stories and topics readers are interested in. But I want to make the point too that sometimes I'll get a pitch, but it's not a no, it's not right now. So for example, I recently wrote a story about a Maryland school district that did a district-wide school library renovation. 48 school libraries were renovated in 1 year. I got the pitch, or I heard about the project before the construction began, but I waited till it was nearly complete so I could go visit a library and I could talk to students about the impact and the teachers about the impact.
Excellent. Chad, I get that. I'm guessing that most of your pieces just sort of come out of your brain rather than from a pitch. But is there an instance where someone has said, "Hey, let me tell you about such and such a thing"? Was it an expert type of pitch, or was it a specific story type of pitch?
It wasn't a story type of pitch. I've got two examples to share. One is I wrote this piece for my Substack, Alderman Education, about the Dibbles early reading screener. And it came out of a report of the maker of the Dibbles shared their annual report of how kids were doing across all of their schools are participating, a couple 100,000 students. And so it was a summary of an annual report of how students were doing. And I turned it into basically a note for parents of if your child is struggling to read, you need to act quickly because by the time they get to third grade, if they're still struggling, then they're likely to continue struggling. And so you need to act on information early. And so it was a report that got pitched to me, sent to me based on this large scale data. The other example I'll give is I wrote a piece this week for the 74 in our Reading Bright Spots series, and I get a fair number of pitches about. I wrote about reading, and so here's a school that also teaches reading, and they're very generic, and they don't really tell me anything about what the school is doing different from other places or what their actual outcomes are. But the one I wrote about this week was actually a pitch, and it was a full series of video series of 10-minute clips about different aspects of what the district is doing on reading. And so I turned that into a story for the 74.
So those are successful pitch examples.
Yeah, yeah. But they're very specific pieces. They're not loosely tied to my point about like, you write about the teacher labor market. I will also sell about teachers or something like that. They're very much tied into what Chad is interested in.
It seems like the better people can know what the journalist is interested in, if people can get in our brains, then they can get us to write about the next thing.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, Emma Kate, go ahead.
Add one small thing, which is also like I understand the question about pitches and why they're important, but I think it's also valuable to like build a source reporter relationship sometimes, and that isn't always just a one-way pitch. And so that might be something that's more valuable. And if I know the person's name in my inbox, it does make a difference. I'm going to read that email.
Excellent. MJ, do you want to take a shot at this, or Jeremy, do you want to ask another question from the audience?
I can hop in just to reiterate like what Emma Kate was saying there. Just having that relationship, especially we haven't touched really on issues of like access and being able to like talk to various teachers or knowing everything about every teacher in a district, right? So to have those relationships with communications professionals who might be able to tell us something cool. And the other thing I'm just going to add is I also like a pitch about an expert, but it is a bit of a long game, right? So it doesn't mean that I'm going to be writing that story right now, but kind of building that list of expert sources is really helpful. Or even just making sure on your website that your staff bios, like it makes it clear, like this person might be an expert in X, because then I would know who to reach out to. A lot of universities have like expert databases, I guess, or and so you can kind of say like, oh, I need someone who can talk to this, and okay, now I have the professor. And I think that's something that companies could do as well, to so we kind of know who you have on staff and what they might be able to speak to.
And maybe even talk to you without necessarily appearing in the next story. I know that it's confusing and frustrating for people to talk to a journalist for a half hour or even longer, and then the story doesn't appear. But there's, as you explained, there's value into having that pre-existing relationship when a story does flare up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's super, super great practical examples there. Thank you. This next one can be a little bit of a lightning round, especially for the folks who maybe not as relevant for Chad, but the folks who work in newsrooms. How long does it typically take from the time you pitch a story idea to when it gets published, and what affects that timeline?
I can start. I'll start. So this is the timeline from when I pitch a story to my editors. Is that right? I'm going to say between an hour and 3 years. So basically that is a real life example. I have a story I pitched. I really want to get to it. Stay tuned. That I pitched 3 years ago. I just haven't, it's coming. And then, we have a stand-up, our editorial team every morning, and I'll come in with an idea and they'll say yes, no, or maybe next week.
I was nodding furiously because I think that's so true. And part of what determines it, at least for my team, because we are a smaller team, is how much work needs to go into the piece. So an example is we got this really great question at ISTE last year about, if I were a company selling into these new ESA markets, would public school districts respect me less, essentially? Or like, would that affect how I'm seen? And I was like, that is a great question. Like, we need to answer that question. I went back, my editors were fired up. And we decided to bring it to our research center, the EdWeek Research Center. And I just shared the results of that, like at our June event a couple of weeks ago. So that's almost a year that it took to like get that work done. We still got it done, but like, the more hands are in it, the more data we need to collect, the more sourcing, it just is going to take longer.
Yeah, +1 to everything. I also think when you work on a small team, you have to adjust to for like breaking news or other stories that might come up along the way. So sometimes the delays have nothing to do with that pitch itself. It's, hey, we have, 3 legislative committees and a school board meeting we have to watch this week, and these other things are happening that we need to share this news with the public or answer this question in the meantime. So yes to what everyone was saying, but also that, it's a balance.
Yeah, that's great context. I think just, of course, when you are a vendor who's excited about the upcoming selling season and that sort of thing, right? Like you're hoping, great, we've pitched, it's been accepted, that's going to, hopefully that'll come out soon. And sometimes there are a lot of different things. And to your point, MJ, the world interferes with when and how quickly you can publish. So I think that's, we're getting close to time here. So I think we'll close the Q&A for now. But if anyone has any follow-up questions we didn't get a chance to address, you can direct those to me at jeremy.cesarek, CESAREC, at finpartners.com, so we can help provide some insight on that. And this basically concludes today's webinar. So thank you to Alexander, Chad, Kara, Emma, Kate, and MJ for sharing your valuable insights today. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining our media roundtable and offering some great questions. I urge all of you to subscribe to Alexander and Chad's newsletters and to follow K-12 Dive, Chalkbeat, and Edweek Market Briefs coverage. That'll really help you stay informed on all the fast-moving education stuff happening in the landscape. All of those are really important resources. They're invaluable to the work we do on behalf of our B2B clients, and I think you'll really appreciate everything they have to share. So thanks again to all of you, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon and a great summer, and watch your emails because we will be posting another webinar at more towards the end of the summer. So we hope to see you there again. Thanks so much. Take
Thanks,
care,
Jeremy.
everyone.
Thanks all.